Antje Fiedler, and I'm an associate editor of the Journal of Small Business Management. I have the great pleasure to talk with Professor Lorraine Uhlaner about her paper that advances research on social entrepreneurship through a constraint-based individual perspective of who chooses to create social value when in their life course. The paper has been co-authored by her together with her colleagues Professors Bridget Hoogendoorn, Peter van der Zwan, and Stephan. Lorraine is part of the faculty of the Prague University of Economics and Business. Their paper, Entrepreneurship, Age and Social Value Creation, a constraint-based individual perspective, has been published first in November 2022 in the Journal of Small Business Management. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you.
So to start with, can you please tell us where the idea for the paper came from?
Yeah, I chuckled when I got the sentence for this because I had to really think back. This particular paper has a very long trajectory from where we started and where we ended up. I think the original idea was pretty mundane. It was like, well, age hasn't really been researched that much in the context of social entrepreneurship, and there's some economic theories out there, and maybe we can take a look at it. Well, by the time we really got to, I would say, a journal that believed in our article, we had modified, I think, the goals of the paper in that we really needed to explain why age has a relationship, and we found that the economic theories really didn't help us. And what was fun is we have four people, as you mentioned, four co-authors, and two of us have a psychology background and the other two economics. So it was a very interdisciplinary team. So we would bounce different theories back and forth and see if the data would fit. And we finally got to a point where we feel that what we're really trying to do is to explain why we see a curvilinear effect, basically, between age and social value creation among entrepreneurs, that there are psychological explanations. And so I think that maybe that answers the first question, and maybe even already a bit of part of the second, in terms of what we actually did. So let me stop and see if you want to pursue that further before I go on.
It does. It's so interesting to learn a bit more about the background of a paper and how the idea came about. So in terms of the theoretical contribution, what is the most interesting takeaway here?
I think what we try to do, and again, I encourage people to read the paper because it'll be hard in a short video to really explain everything. But we found that some of the explanations that were in the literature really weren't consistent with what we know from the psychology research. And what is that? Is that values actually remain stable during adulthood. So to argue that in early and late adulthood, all of a sudden the values go up, but they go down in midlife, it didn't make sense. So one of our colleagues, especially Stephan, is very current on the different psychology theories, introduced us to the situational strength theory. And basically, it's a theory that says that people's values remain the same during adulthood, but the expression of those values will change depending on what we call constraints, things that keep them from acting the way they would like to fully act. What are these common constraints? Well, in midlife, it's child rearing, it's bills to pay because you maybe still have college fees left over to pay back. The life course theory actually is very helpful that way. It's a sociological theory, but it hadn't really been used together with the psychology theories to explain this particular phenomenon. So we merged these theories and we call it the constraints-based individual perspective. I think I'm trying to remember exactly. I think you said it earlier. But we have, so the basic assumption is really that it's constraints that explain these fluctuations in life. There's fewer constraints in early and later life. And then we tested we didn't have a way of directly asking people, what are your constraints? This was a very large database from GEM, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, that some of your audience may be familiar with for this type of research. And so we had to infer a lot, which of course is one of the limitations of the study, but data acted the way we expected. For example, when we interacted age with gender, one would expect, based on all the life course literature and other literature about gender, that women have more constraints than men in midlife, because the childcare burden, even in developed countries, tends to fall disproportionately more in women. So you would expect a steeper curve in midlife, a steeper dip, even though we know that women as a whole, from other research, tend to have higher pro-social values. And this is what we found. We found they were higher than men with pro-social values in terms of the main effect, but the interaction effect was much more steeply curved. Another factor is education. And we found that, again, with constraints, a little bit different explanation. And again, I encourage people who are intrigued at all so far to read the article. I'm trying to summarize some of these key points very quickly. But education also, we argued, will interact with age, in that if you're really low educated, and in this case, because it was an international study, we even looked at the low was below secondary school, so as opposed to college educated. And there, the constraints act throughout the lifetime. So indeed, we see almost a flat line for those people with less education. And yet we see, again, this sharper curvilinear relation with social value creation for the higher educated. So we, again, what we find is that in early adulthood and in late adulthood, not after retirement, but close to retirement, we see much higher rates of social value creation than in midlife. But so I think the theoretical contribution, of course, we're explaining results, but I think what's more important with that is how we use psychology and the psychology research to explain phenomena that historically really weren't brought into the equation. And I think it's important when people start talking about values, or they start talking about that, they go back into the literature and see, well, what does that core literature say? And I don't want to name names, but we do have other recently published articles on this topic where people didn't do that. And we point this out in the paper as well, that, you know, the assumptions are just not consistent with the research. So again, I think the interdisciplinary aspect of it is what really made it a fun paper to work on.
That's so interesting to really see the value of transdisciplinary research, and that is a very hot topic at the moment. So thank you for sharing those insights. In terms of the practitioner contributions and maybe implications for policymakers, that would be my last question. If you could give us maybe some insights there.
Right. Well, it's actually, again, kind of interesting, because if you accept from the psychology literature that values are difficult to change, and we know values are difficult to change, especially pro-social values, then the focus of the practitioners should not be toward trying to change people's values, because that doesn't work. You know, you should do more of this, or should. What you can do is remove constraints. So then the question is, how can we remove constraints, and to whom should we remove them from? Well, according to our research, the constraints are steepest in midlife. And keep in mind, our entire sample are entrepreneurs. We're not trying to convince people to become entrepreneurs. These are people that are vacillating between being more commercially oriented or socially oriented. And it's not a dichotomy. It's a continuum. But if we can remove constraints in midlife by such things as providing more affordable daycare, by paying off college loans, you know, some of the things that are controversially being discussed in politics these days, you know, how much should the government be involved with supporting childcare, for offering lower cost or forgiveness of loans for college education. These kinds of things may actually boost the rate of social entrepreneurship in midlife, because those are some of the key constraints we know keep people from being able to afford, basically, to take the more social activities on. And it isn't just the finances, but it's also the time, because we know from other research in social entrepreneurship that it has more challenges. You already have challenges enough starting a company, but there are even more challenges with social entrepreneurship. So we feel that this constraints perspective, rather than focusing on the values, is the key element that the practitioners should focus on.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I think these are very important and also sensible policy recommendations. I'm sure that the readers of the Journal of Small Business Management are really interested to learn more about the research and will read the full paper. And the paper is available at the Taylor and Francis website of the Journal of Small Business Management. Once again, I would like to thank you, and I very much enjoyed learning about your research. Thank you for your time, Lorraine.
Thank you very much.